Good morning, Paul. And lastly, we have with us our Managing Director for Colliers Philippines. Please welcome Mr. Richard Reymundo.
Hi, good morning.
Hi, good morning, Richard. All right, so gentlemen, let's start our conversation. I do have a couple of questions lined up, but I think we'll move on to the questions that were sent in from the audience. So first, we have a question from Benny de Guzman. I think this would be for Dom. So PEZA incentives has 10 years left due to the new Create Bill. Will new foreign investors and existing foreign investors start to look at Vietnam, Thailand, Cambodia, and other Asian countries that will offer better incentives? What do we think about that?
Yeah. So the Create Law provides for sunset period of 10 years. And after that, there's that a shift to a lower corporate income tax of 20 or 25%, which is closer to where our other Asian ASEAN neighbors are in terms of corporate income tax. So I think 10 years is a long enough period for them to assess the further viability of the Philippines as an investment destination. Um, I don't think there will be an immediate shift to other locations. The good thing about it is that the talks about this create law has been there for several years, and that created uncertainties in the market whether what's going to be the tax regime in the Philippines. So the passage has eliminated that uncertainty, and companies know that there will be stability, and the existing tax incentives will prevail for another 10 years. So I think they made investments here, so I think they are here to stay.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So actually, there is a question directed to you, Dom, from Jose Magsariti. And he said that you have mentioned from 1 to 2 years in this trend, pandemic or quarantine restrictions. What is your source in this matter of the pandemic forecast?
Yeah, this is based on conversations that we have with BPO companies.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of this revolve around how will be the work arrangement moving forward, and I think
Yeah.
it's going to take them 1 to 2 years to figure it out. Until then, long-term commitments, will be very difficult to be made. That's why I said earlier that landlords should also welcome short-term renewals, short-term
Mm-hmm.
leases, so that so that this will not force companies to make uh, call this immediate decisions during this period that they don't know what's going to happen moving forward.
Well, in connection to that, according to our report, office rents on average have declined by about 3.7% quarter on quarter in Q1 2021. Do we see a further correction in the lease rates? And in what areas do we see that largely happening? And when will the lease rates recover? When do we expect that?
Yeah. So uh, as shown earlier, the first quarter figures were really encouraging. It's just unfortunate that we had this surge towards the last part of the quarter, and that's gonna further delay the upward trending of the demand, and
Mm-hmm.
probably the bottoming of the rents by around Q3 and Q4. So probably we're looking at a delay of maybe at most a quarter, and
Mm-hmm.
then until then we would continue rents softening
Mm-hmm.
in
So
line.
that Okay. So that's we see that the majority of the cases in the Philippines are centered around Metro Manila. Meanwhile, areas outside the capital have not had these really huge spikes in cases. Do we see now a deeper, consideration from companies in moving outside of Metro Manila? I mean, we saw earlier in our poll that people are looking at Pampanga, Laguna. So, aside from those, what locations are you seeing that tenants are looking at that's not in Metro Manila, or are they still concentrated in expanding here in the capital?
Yes, many companies are seriously looking at areas outside of Metro Manila right now.
Mm-hmm.
Just that, well, right now also there are opportunities presented by the high level of PESA registered supply. There are also areas with low level of PESA register supply, but they have non-PESA supply that's available. So yeah, I mean, with this COVID-19 lockdowns in Metro Manila and cases that are still expected to increase, so they need to diversify and locate in more stable locations. At the same time, it's really an opportune time right now because of the improvements in infrastructure as well as
That's right.
in line with the benefits that the Create Bill or Create Law will provide.
It's interesting that you mentioned infrastructure. Let me segue a bit to Paul. It's we have our valuation expert with us today in this panel, and from what Dom has described to us about people, companies looking outside of Metro Manila, there's a slow recovery of the office market due to pandemic. Has that in any way affected demand for land within CBDs? Are developers or investors still spending on land banking? I mean, what's the forecast on land values post pandemic?
Yeah, so initially there was a pause during last year's lockdown. So everyone was caught unawares of the severity and the ferocity of the pandemic. So we even saw some of the major developers cut their capex budget for the entire year. So they were mainly focusing on keeping their existing projects afloat, from supporting the sales of their current projects to scrambling to keep their office buildings and malls operational. But once everything has settled down, we've seen some interest from these developers looking for opportunities in the market, especially if there are bargains to be made during the pandemic. So all we've seen now, especially at the start of the year, that developers are looking for these properties, given that developable land in Metro Manila is really really scarce.
So you've seen with your own clients and with the developers that they are really looking at making plans post pandemic. They want to be ready when that comes in. So I
Yes,
think.
so it's both ways.
Mhm,
So it's actually both ways. So they're looking for partners for
mhm.
their existing land bank, or they're looking for other land to acquire for their future development.
Yeah, I mean, Joey mentioned in his residential slides that joint ventures, we expect them to thrive, or still thrive, or still be a good option for developers. Is that something? If that is something that is happening now?
Yeah, there are a lot of foreign developers who wants to join the real
Mhm.
estate party here in the Philippines. So we've seen them partnering with local landowners for joint ventures, and also with the government trust to not dispose of their prime real estate asset in Metro Manila
Mm.
outright. They're looking for a leasehold type of arrangement in their joint venture for their major landholdings in Metro Manila. So yes,
Yeah.
we see
Okay.
many opportunities in that aspect.
That's good. So these opportunities kind of hinge towards, whether people will be vaccinated. And we have a question from JC Wong of our audience. Anybody from the panel can answer. Do you see when we have 50% vaccination done of the total population that the property sector in general will shoot up together with travel? So I know we don't have hotel sector right now, but can we address this question?
Well, if you look at the numbers from the government, so how much have we vaccinated so far? I think we've vaccinated about, or the supply that we have is about 2.5 million, roughly, if I'm not mistaken. Um, so the government is projecting another uh, 4 million in May, and then it starts to ramp up by June. So June is around 10 million. I think July we're gonna start getting around 13 million, and by August to December, that's when you're going to see about 15 to 20 million doses coming in. Um, this still does not include the Covavax facility. So these are the ones which have been uh, bought from the different suppliers. So if you look at that timeline, really it's really on the third and the fourth quarter that we are going to be seeing most of the vaccination happening. So they're looking at what, about 2 million inoculations per week. That is the target. Um, by April, May, it's what, around 500,000. So it just follows how much supply we get. So yesterday there was what, 500,000 Sinovac supply. So with all of these numbers getting about 15 to 20 million by August, September until December, um, realistically, you're going to see uh, companies looking at going back into the office, or a semblance of people going, increasing mobility probably next year in the first quarter.
In the first quarter.
If all of these deliveries happen and the infrastructure to vaccinate people happens. So that the trick is about what, 2 million per week. They're saying it's possible with the manpower. Question is, we need to start preparing for that. The LGUs have it, but the private sector, a lot of the supply is gonna be coming from the private sector. So that's the thing. That's the key.
So since these vaccine supplies are coming in, you have, as you've said, the private sector will probably have most of it. The office sector more likely is looking forward at a faster recovery once the inoculation happens. But the subdued office leasing no doubt contributed to a likewise subdued residential sector. And given that, Paul or Joey, feel free to answer this. Would you say that as of now, condominiums are still a viable investment? And what are the trends on residential demand in and outside of Metro Manila that indicate a positive outlook?
So,
Paul,
okay,
you
I'll
want to
take
start?
it. Yeah. Can I take that, too?
Yes.
So, yeah. What we've noticed, and I think all of us have experienced this, is that during the pandemic and the lockdown, the ultimate luxury is really space. And that's why with the parents and the children working from home and studying at home, there is really a need for more space for the families. So a lot of investors are actually looking outside the Metro Manila for horizontal development or lots to be developed to accommodate this, given that the land prices and property prices here in Metro Manila is a bit expensive. So there are anecdotal evidence to suggest that people are starting to look in the suburbs in Cavite, Laguna, Batangas, Rizal, Bulacan. So residential farmlots also are starting to become a big to trend again. So I think that's something we can look at as well.
Yeah, I mean, during the poll earlier, most people from our audience answered that they would invest in lots, not even house and lot. Do we have any insights on that? Why they would prefer just lots and no development yet?
Yeah, I think it's more of a flexibility on the design and design of the house that they do plan. But on a longer term view, land is a really safe investment, especially if you buy it at a good price currently. As the old saying goes, they don't make any of it already. So land is really a good investment on the long term. Oh.
But there's a question from Dan J. Paris to send to us in the chat. Where do we stand right now on vertical mixed use development?
I think vertical mixed use is here to stay. With densities in areas like Makati and Ortigas and Fort Bonifacio. I think with the pandemic, it's even more important. So imagine if you are in your condo, you are going to be looking at an area where it's easy to get your grocery. It's easy to get the other necessities and not just a standalone. So I think
Hmm.
it's even more important right now.
So, in connection to that, what are the condo developers doing now to drive sales, and what would you recommend they do over the next 12
Joey,
months?
what were the ones that you mentioned? Interesting trends.
Some of them really providing extended, attractive payment terms. So they've really, become innovative with the payment terms that they have been offering. When we were looking at how developers tweak their payment terms a year into the pandemic, so some of them really, further extending these payment terms. Some of them even providing, say, luxury items, watches, laptops, and even gift certificates for some of these projects. So that's
Appliances,
really
like
how
well, yes.
they've responded to slower demand, and
Mm-hmm.
of course that contributed to still, record to contributed to them still recording take up sales during this pandemic.
Uh, Joe, there's a question from JC Wong again. Do you anticipate? Well, this is actually the hotel sector, but let's segue for a bit. Do you anticipate for condo hotels or boutique hotels to stabilize this 2021?
I think the problem for hotel is, when do we see the recovery? I think right now the proposal is to just open travel bubble, but of
Mhm.
course we know that only 1% of Philippine population big enough to then definitely we won't qualify for
Hmm.
any travel bubble that will be introduced within Asia, and it will be far fetched dream for us to be part of that. But I think even IATA is saying that the recovery will probably happen 2024, and
Mhm.
let's see. I think only then we'll see. Uh, Airlines again upgrade their fleet or resuming operations pre-pandemic levels. But let's see, moving forward, the earliest projection is
Well, that's
2024.
quite far off. I mean, for hotel developers, Paul, do you have any insights on what they're doing? You know, are they repositioning themselves, or are they on a wait and see?
I think for
What's
future projects, I've spoken with some of the technical engineering firms, and they said that those who are still in the planning stage are still pushing through with their plans, given that the completion of these projects are still 3 to 5 years down the line. So expecting that the market has normalized. But on the current scenario, we saw that even the giant hotel operator like Shangri-La Makati has already closed. So that is a sign of things to come. Really,
Mhm.
hotel is the hardest hit sector. No travel is allowed, and
Mhm.
kids are not even allowed to go out. So you
That's
can't do
true.
your normal staycations on the weekend and the likes. So until travel resumes normally, I think the hotel sector will be uh, in dire straits.
Yeah, that is true. Well, in connection to the hotel sector, another hard hit sector in real estate is the retail. So let's move on to retail. So what are the trends in the retail industry right now that were seen as just good to have or even unnecessary before, but have now become essential to their operations? And do you see those trends becoming the norm even as we recover moving forward?
I think what Joey said encapsulates it is
Mm-hmm.
really the brick to click strategy. That's perfect. It really says everything about that. If you were brick and mortars before, you need to pivot to an online strategy. Joey, what was your survey that even after the pandemic, what was that percentage that they were saying they will still go buy online?
Online, yeah.
More than 60% still want
That's
to buy on.
that's a huge number. So that will change buying habits moving forward. And I was surprised with your numbers on Joey on the number of subscribers for Gcash
Mm.
and the other. That was that like 30 million for Gcash users. That is so indicative of how we are doing things right now. And I like the question that Joey posed: is are you willing to pay extra for Prime Express delivery? In the US, that's normal now to do same day delivery, and you can just imagine it opens that up to a lot of different types of retail, grocery, for instance, fresh produce. Could you imagine that? Meat products. That opens it up, and even Joey mentioned the likes of that Merrimart dark
Box,
grocery.
dark
Dark
grocery.
box.
Yeah. So that again, it is changing the way we are going to spend. This is a trend that we were seeing for the future. It just got adopted so much
Yeah.
faster because of
So
the pandemic.
so now we think that it's non-negotiable for retailers to adapt to new technology such as
Yeah.
cashless payments. They should explore online or e-commerce
It's
capabilities.
a must.
Mm.
If you're in retail, check out your platform. Is your
Mm-hmm.
platform easy to navigate? Check out the variety of products that you have. If you still have a disconnect of the variety of inventory on your online platform and in your stores,
Mm.
that's a problem. But if your inventory is pretty much as close to what you have on your physical stores, then you
Mm-hmm.
could pivot easier. Could you imagine when we went into ECQ, stores were closed again, and the ones with inventory levels that are pretty much close or the same as what they have in their physical stores before, that it was an easier shopping experience.
Mm.
Another thing that is a pain point right now is real-time inventory levels. Sometimes you buy something, and what? 2 days after they say, "Oh, I'm sorry, this is not. We don't have it that in the
Yeah.
inventory anymore. We're gonna return your payment." That will not create loyal customers.
Mm.
So these are the things that the retailers need to start thinking. You pivot to your online, but think of the experience, think of your inventory levels,
Mm-hmm.
think of the service, not just your in your online presence that you don't have service. I think it's even more important that the service level is there.
Like so now it's really more about online experience and how you cater to your customers virtually. But before we were talking a lot about destination experiences, making your mall space sort of a destination for people.
I
But
I,
how will that affect the
I
physical
think
mall
Joey
space
hit
now?
that even in
Mm-hmm.
the online presence, you could have that experience. Curation. Joey
Mm-hmm.
mentioned that in his presentation. If you curate well your online experience, that it makes it so different from your other competitors, then that's a very good experience.
So, but there still will be space left in physical spaces in malls. So how will they repurpose that, or what's a
Joey,
recommendation
what
for
was
physical
your
space?
recommendation for the physical space?
Well, because of rising vacancy, so one is showrooming. That is
Mm.
another option. So, for example, Zalora, you can try something on but purchase it online, or really inspect the physical and feel the item, but you may still order it online. And then I think there's a proposal from the government to, when we talk about al fresco, it's really outside of the mall, but one option is to just put tables and chairs outside of the restaurants, still utilize the vacant space. So there's really a lot of options still for retailers, for physical retailers. And I think last presentation we mentioned that another way of repurposing this vacant spaces is to convert them into micro warehouses, fulfillment
Mm.
centers, which of course complements that demand for a same day 24-hour delivery. So it's interesting how all these property sector segments are repurposing and are being converted into something that is more useful and what the market requires at this point.
Paul, do we see that with your clients or
Yeah.
the developers? They are looking to shift or repurpose their assets.
So we've spoken to one developer who asked us specifically that question. They're
Hmm.
building, they're in the finishing stage of their mall, and they want to know whether their current setup will work. open that again based on really this
drops the rate significantly, then you will lose the account. So I think that's one thing that you can do. Ask questions, understand more about the requirement, so that you'll be able to craft the acceptable commercial structure. So these are, of course, lowering the baseline rent, rate escalation structure. If you want to protect your headline rent, then work on the providing rent-free incentives inside the lease term. We're not only talking about commercial terms here. Flexibility is something very important right now. So agreeing to short-term leases, we've seen 6-month leases or even 3-month leases in permanent spaces during this time. Look at pre-termination options, be more liberal with those. It's still considered commercial terms, but legal in nature because these are in the contracts already. So, I mean, look at those and conduct proper due diligence to balance out the risk that you are taking into your company.
So that's what we mean when we say, Joey said, a blend and extend strategy that we have. Last question for Dom. There's a question from Ivan Ison. What is the prospect of data centers in the Philippines, and do you have any idea about their requirements?
Yeah, so according to our data center specialist in the region, it's going to be huge in the next 12 to 24 months. Simply because this is already the developing countries are already the next phase of expansion of these data center operators. And they're primarily looking at or prioritizing countries with high population. So we're up right on top in terms of that category. So they're looking at warehouses to be retrofitted as data centers. Floor to ceiling height is very important. They're also looking at vacant lots of at least 2 to 4 hectares. Power requirement is something also that's very important. They need a dedicated substation on site if there's redundancy. So all of the things that BPOs require make it more robust, then that's gonna work for data
For data
centers.
centers. So that's something to look forward to for the office market recovery. Last
Yes.
question, guys. This is from Lala Remando. Where do you see residential demand outside Metro Manila coming from? Are the buyers also coming from Manila, from the local or province, or from the OFWs? Joey, would you
Well,
like to take it?
yeah,
Would you want?
there's a pretty good demand really come from OFWs. In fact, if you look at the house and lot only projects being launched outside of Metro Manila, um, well, it's no longer surprising to see a good fraction of this demand coming from OFWs. Did some, um, I've had some, interviews with brokers that are selling properties in Southern Luzon and Central Luzon, for example, and they tell me that 60-70% of their take-up is coming from the OFW market. And of course, for this market, the sweet spot is really the 1.7 to 3.2 million pesos per unit. And if you look at specific locations, so you have the likes of Cebu, Bacolod, where the demand for residential demand is, the take up for residential units is pretty stable. There's also some movement in Iloilo. So interestingly, both office and residential take up are doing well in Iloilo. Then, of course, similar to the result of our poll earlier, it remains an attractive location. And we had some mid-income projects being launched in Pampanga, which contributed to pretty good sales figures in Pampanga in 2020. Same with Calaba, Cavite, Laguna, Batangas. We presented this during our last presentation. 60 to 90% of horizontal projects in those three locations are about 60 to 90% taken up already as of end of 2020. So, yeah, OFW demand still a good chunk of this take up, still accounting for a good part of the total demand. And we believe that this will likely to be the trend moving forward, especially for horizontal house and lot only projects.
Okay, we have about 30 questions from the audience, but guys, if we weren't able to answer the questions, we will be sending all of these to our panel, and you may expect answers from them, and we will send them over to you. But for now, thank you to our panelists from Colliers Philippines, Joey Bondo, Paul Ramirez, Richard Raimundo, and Dom Andaya, for shedding light on the current landscape of the real estate sector and providing us with useful insights and recommendations as we move towards second half of the year. We are second half of the year now. And now, before we go, we'd like to once again thank our event partners, the British Chamber of Commerce Philippines,